I heard an art teacher say one time that every painting has an ugly stage. Well, this painting started out ugly and it pretty much stayed in that ugly stage till darn near the end, but I was able to pull it out just in time. I made a number of mistakes in this painting. I didn't edit them out. They're there for you to see and to learn from. If you're a new painter, I think you'll particularly find this very interesting. Stay tuned. Welcome to my channel where I'll help you remove ceilings that keep you from being the best artist you can be. We're going to paint a sunflower today, and I've gotten this photo from Paint My Photo. It's a free website with just all kinds of beautiful free photos if you want to check them out. And I'm going to do something a little different than I've ever done before. I normally mix my paints, everything that I'm going to use. I kind of figure out what the colors are going to be and the values. Then I go through and I add an open medium to extend the drying time. Because we're working with so few colors, because it's such a small painting, because I want to sort of figure this out as I go. Like I said, I've never done this before. This time I'm just going to put a little pile of medium in the corner, and before I dip into the paints, occasionally I'm going to dip into that medium just to slow these paints down, and let's just see how it does. I wouldn't do that on a large painting, but I think on a small one it's fine. I just looked at this photograph and pulled colors, ready-made colors that I'm seeing in that. So I have pulled out a cad yellow light. These are all Liquitex. The second one is called yellow oxide. The third one is cad red medium, which is a very orangey red. The next one is this burnt sienna, which is just one of my favorite colors. This next one is raw sienna. This dark brown is called burnt umber. And then for that center in the green, I'm going to experiment with this chromium oxide green. I'll lighten it with some yellow or with this yellow oxide, and we'll just see how that does. I'm using Rosemary & Company Classic Long Flats, a size 4 and a size 5. I love these brushes because they are very, they're not sharp on the end. They don't have a real sharp, defined edge to them. So this shows you how a regular brush has a very straight, fine edge compared to these where the edge is a little more, I use the term ruffled. That's not a very professional term, but they're a little more rounded, they're a little more uneven, they're not as precise, and because of that, these give you a softer, more impressionistic stroke. You can't hardly get a sharp line with these. So I want to keep this painting very loose. I'm going to put a little bit of this slow dry medium in the corner. I like to start out with my darkest dark, so let's identify where they are at the base of these petals up where the light's catching. I'm going to use this raw sienna, and I think we can kind of just take that right out of that pile. So I'm just going to put some drops of that in these places where I'm seeing these darkest areas. You know, sunflowers are like clouds. They're all different. They're all very organic, and if it doesn't look like your photograph, no one is going to know except you. So, all right, so I've got those little reds in. I'm noticing as I'm going around this painting that these darks are getting a little darker. So I'm going to use a little of the burnt sienna and a little of the burnt umber. I'm going to darken that up just a little bit. Oops, my little medium is flowing downhill. So I'm going to just kind of start dropping that in this area, doing it very loose, not anything super precise. As it gets away from the light, it's going to get little darker, so I'm just adding a little more burnt umber and less of the burnt sienna. Over here it gets real dark in front of those leaves, meaning that that part of the flower is dipped down a little bit. So these shadows are really important. Getting the shadows dark enough, getting the lights light enough are what's going to give your painting some oomph to it. There are a few places up in here that's catching. And that's pretty much it. So it's just real simple, super quick. I think that's about it. Now we've got a shadow area in here. I'm going to drop back. I'm going to use the burnt sienna and the raw sienna together. So it's going to be a little lighter than that one. And I'm going to drop that in this inside of the shadow. I did it in one stroke, very simple. I'm not overthinking it. I'm not dabbing. All right, next we're going to move into this colored part of the flower. And this is where we do want to be sure that we're putting some stay dry medium, because we don't want this drying out. When we go back in and add this next lightest yellow, we want these colors to blend nicely together. We don't want that drying and having a hard edge. So slow dry medium in with your paint, or be sure and dip your brush in the slow dry medium on occasion. So I'm going to go into this cad red. I'm seeing just a touch of red, and I'm going to tone it down with this raw sienna. I'm going to get just a drop of that slow dry medium and just see how that looks. So let's just drop a little of this in and see what we think. What do you think? This is a place where you can lighten it, you can darken it, you can make it more vibrant. If you want it to read more vibrant, you can use more of the cad red and less of the, I call these sort of earth colors. You can use less of the earth colors and more of these vibrant colors, but I think that's reading pretty nicely. There you can see I've got a little more of that cad red on there, what that looks like. I'm seeing this in several places. I'm not trying to be super precise with the photograph. I'm just seeing that there's a little bit of this here and there, and I'm just dropping that in. I'm being pretty loose about it. I do want to be mindful of places that look like they're in shadow, that we stay kind of true to that. Notice that my brush strokes are going in the same direction as the petal. I'm not just doing something straight up on a petal that has a curve to it. I'm letting my strokes follow the shape of the petal. Again, this isn't rocket science. I'm doing this very loosely. There's some things in shadow back in here. Again, notice that I'm doing these in one stroke. I'm not dabbing, I'm not fussing with it. I'm just putting down a stroke. I'm kind of looking at where I want to put it. I'm putting it down and I'm leaving it. If you feel like this is getting too dark when we get finished, you can always go back in and add some lights. But I think one of the biggest problems is when people don't get their darks dark enough, and then things start looking a little flat and they're just not dramatic enough. The paintings are a little boring looking. So this, do yourself a favor and don't be too afraid to put down something that's a little dark. Okay, I'm going to next put in this center area. So let's just, again, I'm going to dip in the slow dry medium. I'm just going to pull some of these colors, kind of mix them together. They're going to be much lighter on this side, so we could even pick up some of this yellow oxide. I'm not cleaning off my brush. I'm just letting these different colors kind of combine on my brush. We can always go back over this. It's getting a little darker, a little redder down in here. Starting to get very dark down in here, but not as dark as this. Again, up here where the light's really catching, might go even lighter still. We can always go back over this. This is sort of a transparent layer. We can go back over this later with some white added to it, and it'll make this more opaque, but we're just trying to kind of get a block in going right now. Loose big strokes. Starts getting a little red right in here, and then starts getting much darker when it comes here, but it's not as dark as that. You know, your colors don't have to be exactly like a photograph, but things need to be relative. In other words, you may decide you're going to do this a different color than this, but there needs to be that much of a value difference between the two in order for that to read right and look like it's in shadow. I'm going to leave that green in the middle for a little bit. Let's work on these petals. So we've got some petals that are in very bright light that are going to be our brightest yellow, and then we have others that are more of a middle tone. So I'm going to use this yellow oxide. I'm going to dip that brush a little bit. I want to make sure we keep some slow dry medium in this paint. So I'm going to mix these two together. I'm going to lighten that up and just see how that looks. See if that's something, if I like the way that looks. I do like the way that looks. And you see, because there's some slow dry medium in there, that brush stroke just blended into that one a little bit, which is absolutely fine. And see, just touching that, those are blending together nicely. I like that a lot. Again, real loose, real fast, not fussing with it. See, I love how this is blending together. It looks more like oils when it does that. So let's just go over all the petals in this mixture of the yellows and get kind of a medium value. Then we can go back. Let's be sure and keep our slow dry medium in it. Then we can always go back Okay, you may be thinking, well, that looks like a wagon wheel that flames of fire coming out from the side of it. That's terrible looking. So we've got our initial block in here, and we see kind of where the shadows and the lights are. Now I'm going to go back over, and I'm going to use my whites. So let's start again with the darkest colors. I'm going to pull this yellow oxide, a little titanium white. So I've said when I'm doing my paintings with you, I'm not going to edit out mistakes that I make. I'm going to talk through them. I don't like the way this is looking. I don't like all this red coming down. I think it's too severe. I think it's very distracting. It does kind of look like a sunflower on fire. So I'm gonna minimize that. I'm gonna paint over it. I'm gonna let some of it kind of show through, and let's just play with it a little bit and see what we can do with it. I think overall these are reading too dark, so I'm going to go back into this cad yellow light and this yellow oxide and continue to work with that with some white. But we don't want to get rid of all our darks. I think that's just too screaming. It's too severe. It's just calling for too much attention. So let's try this yellow oxide and the burnt sienna. Let's try a little bit of that and see what that does. See if that doesn't calm that down quite a bit. Because these paints are still wet, I can drop that in there. So let's try, since the paints are wet, let's try blending these a little more so you don't get these severe lines. That is definitely looking better to me. Sometimes you just got to try things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. There are a lot of paintings that I have ditched over the years because they weren't working, and I encourage you to, before you just ditch it, just say, okay, what's wrong with this? Well, that red looks too bright, it looks too garish. So let's try toning it down with something that's not quite as bright, and let's see if we can get a better effect with that. And you know, if it looks terrible and you end up painting over it or something later, that's fine. But at least you've learned, where if you just walk away from it, all you've just learned is that you'll allow yourself to quit, and we don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. Let's go over this again and mix some white in this time. And just really catch these places where the light is hitting. There's a brighter place right in here. Sometimes just a little bit of something real bright can make more impact than doing a lot of it. I'm dropping in some of this burnt sienna. It's getting much redder and darker over here. The light is still catching a little bit. It gets much darker down in here. It gets a little bit lighter back in here. I am liking that much better, and we can go back in and use a very small brush and get some texture in there. Let's see what we can do with this center. So let's take our chromium oxide green. My medium has completely run off the page, so let me put a little up here. Maybe we'll have a little while before it runs away. So let's clean my brush for that one. So when you're looking at the picture, you're seeing there's a sort of these seeds almost twirl into the center. So let's see if we can put a little motion in that. So I'm just twisting that brush. I think that's kind of nice. Gets a little darker as it gets over here. I think that got too dark. So at least we got a little bit of swirl going on in there. still think this looks a little too red. I'm going to tone that back down a little bit, see if I can reclaim it. But you know, I like how some of this color is bleeding through. I'm not trying to just obliterate that color. I'm just trying to let it not be quite as pronounced. And at this point, I'm looking at my reference photo, but not so much. To me, it's more at this point what's going to look like it's reading correctly. Some of these places, like right here, where you've got kind of a sharper edge, if that paint's still workable, you can blend that in a little bit. Soften these edges a little bit so you're not getting these hard edges. I think these are getting too dark again, so I'm just going to drop some more of this cad yellow light on those tips. You can even do some cad yellow with the white mixed in to give you a little more coverage, just to get those tips nice and bright. And this one is very bright. Sun's really hitting it. I'm taking the cad yellow and white and I'm just going over that again. And this leaf has a funny shape to it, but it's because it's, you know, we're sort of finding it there at the side. There's a funny little place where there's shadow here and shadow there, and the light's just going across. Those make kind of interesting spaces, so don't forget to drop those in. If anything looks too dark, too heavy, you can just go back over it a little bit, which is what I'm doing here. But I'm leaving some of this red peeking through, which I still like. I'm going to go back in and reestablish some darks. I felt like there were some little darker spots in there at the base here and there that have sort of disappeared and gotten painted over. Sometimes it's those little details, particularly down in here, that got pretty dark. I'm just using the burnt umber. Just putting some little dollops here and there. I'm not trying to do a round circle. I'm trying to just do some little points and dabs here and there. All right, let's try putting a little background in and let's see what that does to it. Sometimes getting a background around something helps you get a better feel for if it's looking realistic or not. Put this background in. I'm going to do this. I'm just going to take several different greens. Here we've got brilliant yellow green. I've got sap green, which is a very dark green, and we've got this same chromium oxide green. I'm just going to drop this in super loosey-goosey. Might even just drop some of the yellow in that we've used. Let's go back with this chromium oxide. I think it can be nice just tying that, using that green one more time. So I am just taking I'm taking a big brush this time. This is the same style. This is the Rosemary & Company. This is the size 10 classic long flat. And I am just taking some of this and some of that. might have to drop back to a little smoother brush to get in around these places, or I can just leave this super big brush. Whatever you want to do. It's important to get some darks that are dark enough, but then I like to mix in a little something else so it looks like there's a little light, a little vegetation back there, not just a solid color. This is the sap green that I'm using. It's just super dark, but it really helps that pop. You'll want to get the sides of your canvas painted as well. Here's some of this chromium oxide green. Here's some of this little yellow oxide. Just blending those together. Super fast. If this makes you cringe, you can use a brush that's smaller that has a sharper edge, but I think for this real loose, impressionistic look, this is nice. I'm repeating the same color that's in the flower, the same green that's in there, and then just adding some other things with it, but it's a way of getting some good color harmony. I'm just painting around this super fast, big strokes, not dabbing anything. There's so many ways to put in backgrounds. I think I'm going to do a video at some point on backgrounds because they're just 100 ways, a million ways to put in backgrounds. This is just one. May not appeal to you, but it's a lot of fun. If you've never put a background in this way, I encourage you to try it. Particularly if you're trying to get kind of a loose look. This is really nice in oils too. I've done some oils with this kind of background and they were just beautiful. I did not put a slow dry medium in this. I'm doing it so quickly and it's such a small painting, but if I was doing a larger painting, I probably would do a slow dry medium mixed in. You want to get all your little white dots covered up. I think it's nice when you drop in a little bit of, like we know the light's coming from this direction, to add in some whites here and there. Just lets the viewer see again that, gosh, there's some light coming from the right side of the painting. If you've messed up your drawing, sometimes you can correct it by going back over it with the yellow. Sometimes you can just correct it by carving out something with the green and just reshaping things that way. Okay, I've gotten away from it, and one of the things that I don't like is it feels like there's not enough dark in this part. You don't get the sense that this is really in shadow. So I'm going to go back in and just darken that up just a little bit. And see if that'll make a little difference for us. You like that us term? We're in this together. I'm going to take this little liner brush. It's a size 0 little liner, and I'm going to put it in this raw sienna, and I'm just going to try putting some dots here. You're going to have to be careful to vary them a lot and not get into a repetitive stroke. As they get closer to this inside, they're darker. So this is a burnt umber right in here. This is the raw umber out in here. I can already see how my strokes are getting repetitive. And they're not exactly round. They're going to get, let's get a little wet. So they're going to get darker. So I'm using the burnt umber down in here. The more, if you push too hard on this, it makes the brush splay out like it did right there. That's not a good stroke, and I just pushed too hard on it. You might have a very small round brush that might work real well for this too. Oops. So I'm not going to try to film me doing all these dots. I'm going to do them and then let you see the finished product. Here I'm going to show you what it looks like. This was pretty tedious, I'll say, going in, putting in the dots, but where the darker part of the sunflower was, I used the darker dots, so I used the burnt umber. Up in here, I moved up to the raw sienna and kept that a little lighter. So I'm real happy with that. I think overall it still looks a little dark and needs more sunlight. So I'm going to take this cad yellow light again, and I'm just going to, okay, I think that looks too bright. I'm going to mix in with just a little of that yellow oxide and just hit some of these tips. I'm not going to cover up all our darks, but just try to reestablish some lights one more time in there. Just put a little more sizzle going. I felt like the painting was still looking a little too flat, so I went in and mixed some white in with my cad yellow light and hit that and got that real light and lightened these up, and gosh, that really made that pop, and it really made it look like the sun was catching on that side. So I'm going to go through and just hit some of these places and just bump the lights up just a little bit more. I think getting these darks a little darker and then getting the lights a little lighter. I think that's much better. I have found in so many of my paintings, if I will just bump up the lights and darken up the darks, it's just kind of like magic. It just brings a depth there that wasn't there before. You really get the sense of light hitting things. It's just lovely what happens. I hate that word magic, but you know what I mean. Okay, much better, much better. You really get the feeling now that this is down in and now it's coming back over, folded over, and that's catching the light. Much better, much better. Okay. So I've decided that without that leaf underneath this flower, you know how when you see a picture of a person without their neck, it looks kind of weird. It looks a little weird to me. I don't feel like it's reading correctly. So I'm going to mix up sort of a gray green just to loosely put in a leaf here, and we're really going to show that it's a leaf by this little off-white line. So I'm going to go back to this chromium oxide green. I'm going to put some white in it, see if we can kind of make that look a little chalkier. See, I think that's good. It needs to be light enough to read differently from the background. So let me just, I'm just, again, very loosely, I'm just looking at my reference photo. It goes up, goes down, kind of goes up through here, goes down pretty sharply. I'm just going to block that in super loose, don't overthink it. Kind of comes down through here. It's okay for it to go over a leaf. I'm sorry, over a petal. Goes up and then it's kind of squared off. So we get the sense that that's a super big leaf, which they are. Big strokes. I'm going to leave this super loose. I'm not going to overwork it. I'm not going to try to finesse that. I'm going to use a little liner brush, and if you've never used a liner, it's designed to give you long, thin lines, but it needs to be wet. So I'm going to wet it. I'm going to, so that's not a pure white line. It has a little bit of that green tone in it. So I'm going to just mix a lot of white into the edge of that green to where it's just has a hint of that green in it. I'm going to wet my brush again. I'm going to get that nice and wet, and then again, I'm not going to overthink it. Notice that this is not straight down. It has a little bit of a curve to it. We want this to look like the leaf is going up and going down, and you can really establish that feel just by where you put those lines. So for example, let's do this middle one first, kind of get that established. So it's going to start in this crevice and it's going to come down. Do it in one stroke, don't overthink it. Every stroke doesn't have to be equal. But think about where you're going to put it before you lay it in. You'll notice they're not necessarily even. I like this veining that's coming off of them. And again, you can use this to really get the sense of the direction of that leaf and how extreme it is. All right, I got that one a little thick, so I'm just gonna, well, it's hard to wipe it off. I'm just gonna put some green back in there. And we'll try it again. There's not much that goes wrong with acrylic paint that you can't fix. I'm going to put this one in. We don't even have to put that one in, but we can. Okay, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I think that does what it needs to do. I am seeing the stem. I'd not noticed that before. I'm not excited about putting that stem right in the middle here, but we could put a stem in there. I almost wouldn't mind that stem coming out here. You know, sometimes a stem will kind of come out from a sunflower and go down. we can also put another leaf back in here, if that would help. This does look kind of odd, not attached to something. Well, since the leaf is there, let's go ahead and drop it in there. Not my favorite place. You'll notice that stem is much lighter. The sun is catching it. So I'm going to put some of this cad yellow with a touch of our chromium oxide green. In the picture it's right here, but I think so we can see it better, I'm gonna do this in one stroke. I don't like how it crossed that leaf because it's definitely behind that flower. I don't really like that. I don't like that being right in the middle. I think that looks kind of odd. Now I've just messed up my leaf. That's okay. Let's try it over here and let's just see. It's a pretty thick stalk. I like that better than down in here. So to fix this, you can just go back in and drop in some dark green again. Just cover that up. Not a big deal. If you messed up your leaf there, you can touch it up. All right, this isn't going to be exactly the same, and I think that's still could be wider. Sunflower stalks are extremely thick, and the way the sun's hitting it, the light is, usually you would think it would be darker here and lighter here, but because the sun's coming over here, we're seeing a lightness right through there, and it gets a little darker up here at the top. So I think for our purposes, we're going to call this done. It's a little messy in there. You could do a little cleanup here and there if you want to, but again, just not overthinking it. But I think just having a leaf and a stem does give that some support. That stem is not very straight. It's okay. It's an impressionistic piece. Yeah, I like that a lot better. I might put in one more little tweak of the vein. We'll call that one done.